So last night, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa making clear the decisions of the party's National Executive Committee meeting. Party leaders criminally charged have 30 days to step aside. As we await a presidential address this evening on what restrictions may be tightened or relaxed this coming Easter, let's drill into what the president said regarding his own party issues. And I'm joined now by political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe from the University of Zululand. Professor, good evening. Thank you very much for your time. So the president, it seemed, was really clear last night. But is it going to be as simple as saying Ace Magashule, Daniel Caesar, Zandile Gumede and others who have been criminally charged must just step aside until their trials are over?
Well, it may not be as clear as that, but what is clear is that the ANC president and the NEC have drawn the line. What emerged out of the NEC and the statement that was made by the president is that there is no more equivocation. The ANC has reached a point of no return. For too long, the ANC has been dabbling with the idea of a broad church, which expresses itself as a tolerance of multiplicity of perspectives. Now, what has emerged is that you have, it has coalesced into two factions. One that is dubbed the RET forces, and the other that is pro the president. So what has emerged is that there's been more of an obliteration within the NEC of the RET forces, if one were to adopt the language that they use. So that is the first thing. Then the second thing is that there is a banishment of sorts, that the instruction is that people aligned to those forces and who are going to campaign will actually be disciplined. So anyone who stands up and say, I support radical economic transformation as defined by the other group or faction will be dealt with. So there couldn't be anything much more clearer than that. The question is whether the people who support those forces or that perspective or that body of opinion have the muscle on the ground to push back. We've seen already marches, one led by the retired Lieutenant General Mutau, who has argued very strongly that the ANC that is in power at the moment or in office does not represent what he considers to be the ANC of Oliver Tambo, and he has called on a rebellion of sorts. So it depends how strong those forces outside the NEC are. But what is very clear is that within the ANC NEC, a position that is very strong and ambiguous has actually been taken.
You know, every time we have an ANC NEC, there's always talk of, we're going to see a split, there's a big showdown. Do you think this is really different? Do you think that this it's a kind of do or die moment? It's either going to be the RET faction within the party neutralized, essentially, or we're going to see a split. Are we getting to the end game of this, in your view?
Well, I think for me, this is do or die. I mean, the ANC has always tended to try to paper over the cracks and of course to say we allow all versions and all perspectives. But what has come out from the NEC statement is that the current group, which one could say is triumphalist, is very clear that within the NEC it has the numbers. And it also happens to be the faction that is also in power. And what is problematic also about the notion of being charged and stepping aside, and is that it can open itself to abuse, where the NPA can charge somebody, and when that person, because that is state action, is not political action, when the state does that and it gets manipulated, then what it means that all members of the ANC leaders can then be forced to step aside because there will be a precedent that is set. Then you can have law enforcement agencies actually determining who becomes a leader of the ANC. So this point But
I hear you, but at the same time, if you trust your judiciary to be doing its homework and building enough of a case before someone is charged, and you have to have prima facie evidence at least before you put together a charge sheet, surely that's fair enough that if you have got to a point where you have been charged criminally and you are awaiting trial, one presumes that the judiciary, in the absence of evidence of corruption or being politically influenced, is just doing its job. Doesn't it follow then that the next step is that politicians who find themselves in such a position should simply step aside? Otherwise, of course, one is buying into what the radical economic transformation faction is saying, which is this is corrupt, this is all politically aligned.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen in this country where people have been charged and found to be innocent, and where the state was also found to not to have a basis of charging the people. The problem with that is that if that happens and a person has already been forced to step aside, there's a mileage that the other group may get. And you are right that we hope that our judiciary will do its own job. But the judiciary and even the state, when you are charged, the state can actually even drag the case. There have been people who have been charged and 2 years has gone down the line without them appearing before the court of law. So it will depend on what this group does, because they can actually go to the court to say this decision stands or is not consistent with the constitution of this country, because the ANC's constitution does say that it must also be subordinate to the constitution of the country, because it is possible that we can charge somebody and create situations where there's manipulation of charges and the weight. But in so doing, you can use the process. So all I'm simply saying is that we must also look at the possibility where this can be open to abuse. And yes, you could argue that in the end, the court can rule in your favor. But we have had cases where a person loses the High Court, goes to the Supreme Court of Appeal, loses again, and goes to the Constitutional Court along the line for a number of years, and only to be found not guilty. So that is the problem if we're going to rely on that as the bulwark against abuse, because in between there could be an abuse.
And of course 30 days is a long time in politics. It'll be interesting to see what Esma Khashule in particular does. Thank you so much for talking to us this evening, political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe from the University of Zululand.